بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه. أما بعد, we are, inshallah, we are meeting for our 8th lecture in Hajj and Umrah. And tonight, inshallah, we will have kind of a recap over what we have said in the past 7 lectures. We're going to go over the pillars of Hajj and the mandatory acts of Hajj and the recommended acts of Hajj. All of which we have mentioned in the proper sequence of the Hajj journey, but we're going to summarize them all and we're going to, inshallah, list them in a way to find out if there is any missing pillar, what would be the consequences if there is any missing mandatory act, if there is any missing recommended act, how everything is going to work for any lack of any of these pillars or mandatory acts. Inshallah, will not be a long lecture tonight, but to start with the pillars of Hajj. Again, the pillars of Hajj are by definition, are things that the Hajj cannot be completed without, the lack of which your Hajj will end up being incomplete, and of course, it will not count as a full Hajj, or if this is the Hajj of Islam, or this is the Hajj that's required as the 5 pillars, then you will have to redo, you will have to do it again if you miss any of those pillars. What are the pillars of Hajj? First is entering the state of Ihram. Of course, Ihram is a pillar of Hajj. If you do all of the course, or if you go through all the course of Hajj that we have mentioned without having Ihram, then you are not in Hajj. You have to have this, to be in the state of Ihram in order to enter the course of Hajj. Second pillar of Hajj is Tawaf al-Ziyarah or Tawaf al-Ifada. This is a pillar of Hajj for every type of Hajj that you are performing. We've mentioned that 3 types of Hajj, al-Ifrad and al-Qiran and al-Tamattu', all of which require this as a pillar of Hajj, Tawaf al-Ziyarah. Tawaf al-Ziyarah starts at the midnight of the day of Eid, And the third pillar of Hajj is standing in the mountain, standing in Arafah. This is the third pillar of Hajj. Standing in Arafah, anytime between the Fajr of the day of Arafah until the Fajr of the day of Eid. Standing in Arafah is required at least anytime between the Fajr of the day of Arafah and the Fajr of the day of Eid. Right. The last pillar of Hajj, according to the majority of the scholars, is the sa'i, or the going back and forth between as-Safa and al-Marwa. The sa'i, or running back and forth or going back and forth between as-Safa and al-Marwa. This is also one of the pillars of Hajj that is required by all 3 types of Hajj that are being practiced. So again, al-Ihram, entering the state of Ihram, those are the pillars of Hajj. And Tawaf, or the Tawaf al-Ziyarah, and standing in Arafah and as-Sa'i. So be careful, because when we're going to be talking about the mandatory acts of Hajj, there are going to be more details in these things that we have mentioned now. There are going to be more details in terms of the mandatory acts, as we're going to see now, inshallah. What are the mandatory acts of Hajj? So before there was the pillars. Now there are the mandatory acts of Hajj. What are the mandatory acts of Hajj? Ihram from the site, the time and the place. We have mentioned that the Ihram has some, there's a time frame in which you have to assume the Ihram, and also there are physical sites that you cannot pass without assuming the Ihram. So entering the state of the Ihram is one of the pillars of Hajj. Entering the state of the Ihram from the proper place and the proper time is one of the mandatory acts of Hajj. I hope you can notice the difference. Entering the state of Ihram is one of the pillars of Hajj. But to enter the state of Ihram from the proper site and in the proper time is a mandatory act. The second is standing in Arafah until sunset. Meaning that you spend a portion of the night, or at least a moment in the night in the area of Arafat. Remember when we talked about the pillars of Hajj, we said standing in Arafat is a pillar. Any time between Fajr, the Fajr of Arafat, until the Fajr of Eid, any time. So that's a pillar. But the mandatory act is to have to stay at least a moment after the sunset. At least a moment after the sunset. Okay. Staying until midnight in Muzdalifah. Staying in Muzdalifah comes when? After you come down from Arafat, go into Muzdalifah, you will have to stay until midnight. You have to stay until the midnight. What is the midnight? The midnight here is not 12 o'clock. The midnight is not 12 o'clock. The midnight is the midpoint between Maghrib and Fajr. Midpoint between Maghrib and Fajr. So, for example, let's just say Maghrib is at 8 o'clock. Maghrib is at 8 o'clock, for example, and then Fajr is 4 o'clock a.m. Then how many hours between Maghrib and Fajr? Then there will be 8 hours between. Let's take a different. Let's just say Maghrib is 9 o'clock. Let's just say Maghrib is 9 o'clock, and Fajr is at 4 o'clock. So how many hours between Maghrib and Fajr? 7 hours. So what is midnight? Midnight meaning after 3.5 hours. So midnight would be 12:30. 12:30. So midnight will be 12:30 because it's a midpoint between Maghrib and Fajr. So we will have to stay until midnight in Muzdalifah as one of the mandatory acts of Hajj. The fourth is stoning in the same sequence. We have mentioned that on the 11th and the 12th and the 13th of the Hijjah, or else known as Ayyam al-Tashriq, you will have to do 3 stoning each day, starting with a Sughra, the small Jamarat, the small stoning site, going towards the medium stoning site, until the biggest or the largest or the greatest Al-Aqaba, Jamrat Al-Aqaba Al-Kubra, the greatest stoning site, in the same sequence on the 11th and the 12th and the 13th. This is one of the mandatory acts of Hajj. Staying overnight in Mina. Staying overnight in Mina, and these are the days in which Ayyam al-Tashriq, in which you do the Jamarat. Also, you will be in Mina and you will have to stay overnight in Mina as one of the mandatory acts of Hajj. In fact, in the Hanafi madhab, they said it's Sunnah, but the majority of the scholars say that it is a mandatory act of Hajj. Right. Shaving and shortening the hair. Shaving or shortening the hair is one of the mandatory acts of Hajj. Although Ash-Shafi'i, he says it is a pillar, but the majority of the scholars, they say it is a mandatory act of Hajj. Right. Before we finish the mandatory acts of Hajj, you go into the last mandatory act of Hajj, which is the farewell tawaf or tawaf al-wada'. The farewell tawaf or tawaf al-wada', it is a mandatory act of Hajj. And this is the tawaf that you do at the end, to end your visit or your trip or your journey to Mecca. The last thing that you do is you do the circulation of al-wada' or the farewell circulation. And if you should not stay overnight in Mecca after that, or you should not perform any kind of business in Mecca after this farewell tawaf. Okay. What are the pillars of Umrah? The pillars of Umrah are the same, except the pillars of Umrah are the same as the pillars of Hajj, except they have to minus standing in Arafah, because there is no standing in Arafah in the Umrah. There is no standing in Arafah in the Umrah. So the same thing without standing in Arafat. Ihram, and then Tawaf, and then Sa'i. Ihram, circulation, and going between the Safa and the Marwa. Those are the pillars of Umrah. What are the mandatory acts of the Umrah? The same thing also, Ihram from the miqat, Ihram from the proper site and the proper time, shaving or shortening the hair. Those are the mandatory acts of the Umrah. Now, what happens if you leave out a pillar? If you miss any of those pillars that we have mentioned? What are the pillars of Hajj again? Without going back to the same slide, the pillars of Hajj are 4. Ihram, entering the state of Ihram, doesn't matter when, but this is a pillar of Hajj to enter the state of Ihram. To do the circulation of al-ziyarah or al-ifadah, to do a sa'i between al-Safa and Marwa, and stand in Arafat. These are the 4 pillars of Hajj. What happens if you leave out any of those pillars? then unfortunately your Hajj is not completed without it. And there's nothing else can make up for it. Okay. So if you leave out a pillar of Hajj, then unfortunately your Hajj is incomplete and you will have to redo the Hajj again. But if you leave out a mandatory act of Hajj, then there's something that you still can do to amend or to actually fix your Hajj, which is a sacrifice. So for example, if you do not do the ihram from the miqat, then you have to do a sacrifice. If you leave out the last farewell tawaf, the last farewell circulation, you will have to do a sacrifice. If you leave out any of the mandatory acts of Hajj, you can do the sacrifice to make up for this incomplete course. If you leave a sunnah, if you leave a recommended act of Hajj, there's nothing that you need to do. There's nothing needed to be done. What are the recommended act of Hajj? You have a few of them here. Tawaf upon arrival for the Qarin and the Mufrid is the arrival Tawaf or the Tawaf al-Qudum. For two kinds of Hajj, it is a recommended act. Al-Raml, which is brisk walking in the first Tawaf. Al-Iddiba', which as we mentioned, uncovering the right shoulder for men. This is a recommended act. Taking a bath before the Ihram. The talbiyah or touching or kissing the black stone, visiting the grave of the Prophet ﷺ in Medina and the grave of his two companions. All of these are recommended acts of Hajj that if you miss any of them, there's nothing that needs to be done, inshallah. So inshallah, by this, we have, alhamdulillah, completed our course of the Hajj, and we'll have our last, inshallah, lecture tomorrow. And again, tomorrow, inshallah, as you may know, we have a potluck iftar here, inshallah, in the masjid. And after the iftar, we're going to have go over the rules, some of the rules of the udhiyah, and different types of the udhiyah. And that will be, inshallah, tomorrow, almost at the same time, around 9:30. Inshallah, we ask Allah Azza wa Jalla to benefit us from what we say and from what we hear, and to teach us that which is beneficial to us. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi